A sound before a sound, a shadow before a shadow. You don't remember when it happened, when the world seemed to pause, to hold its breath, as if something just beyond the walls of your room was waiting for you to notice it. The ticking of the clock slowed. The hum of electricity in the wires quieted, pulled taut into silence. Even the rhythm of your own heartbeat stumbled, just once, like a musician forgetting their place in a score. And then, there it was. The ticket. You did not hear the door open. You did not hear footsteps, or a hand sliding something beneath the wood. But when you looked down, there it lay across the threshold, as if it had always been there, waiting for your eyes to discover it. A rectangle of blood-red card, darker than velvet, its surface shifting faintly in the dim light like a muscle flexing beneath skin. You hesitated before touching it. Some part of you knew that once your fingers closed around it, you would not be able to give it back, to undo the moment. But hesitation is fragile, and curiosity is heavier than caution. Your hand reached out anyway, drawn forward not by your will but by something older, deeper, something that had been calling your name long before tonight. The card was warm. Not the warmth of paper touched by sunlight or a hand, but the warmth of something alive. A pulse moved through it, faint but undeniable, as though veins lay hidden beneath its surface. When you tilted it, the light seemed to swim within it, red deepening to black, black to crimson, crimson to something the color of fresh blood. There were no words at first glance. Only when you turned it slowly, when the angle aligned just right, did the etchings reveal themselves, grooves cut not by ink but by something sharper, as if clawed or carved. Tonight. The letters were not written, they were incised, pressed into the card with a violence that made the surface ripple slightly around each stroke. You ran your fingers over them and felt the edges, raw, unhealed. You imagined that if you pressed hard enough, the letters themselves would bleed. And below the single word, the faintest of marks, a symbol. A circle broken by a line, bisected and mirrored, almost like a mouth opening in silence. You had never seen it before, but you recognized it. Recognition came not from memory but from bone, from marrow, from the place in your body where knowledge waits without language. You turned the card over. Blank. And yet not blank. The longer you looked, the more the surface seemed to ripple faintly, shapes stirring just below it like faces beneath water. You thought you heard something then, a murmur too soft to catch, a breath moving against your ear though you stood alone. You held the ticket away from you, but the whisper remained, sliding between your thoughts. It said nothing you could understand, and yet you felt the weight of command. The knowledge that you had been chosen. And that was when the dreams returned. They had been flickering at the edges of your sleep for weeks, perhaps longer, though you had brushed them away each morning. Dreams of corridors carved from stone, of arches curving overhead, of lights flickering in impossible colors. Dreams of sound without source, music so faint it seemed to crawl along the skin rather than through the ears. Dreams that felt less like invention and more like memory. Now, with the card warm in your hand, you understood, the dreams had been the first invitation. This was simply the second. You set the card down on your table, but the table seemed wrong with it there, as though the wood recoiled from touching it. The grain around it darkened, curling slightly as though burned. You picked it up again. The air grew lighter. The hum of the house returned. The clock ticked once more. The invitation did not want to be put aside. It wanted to be carried. Hours passed, though you do not recall what you did with them. The card remained in your pocket, heavy though it weighed almost nothing. You felt its presence against your thigh like a second pulse, each beat aligning with your own heartbeat, until the rhythm became indistinguishable. At times you reached down to reassure yourself it was still there, though you never truly doubted it. The ticket was not the kind of thing one could lose. And then came the moment. You do not know what time it was when you found yourself at the door again, standing with your coat pulled on, your shoes laced. You do not recall deciding to leave. One moment you were inside, the next you were stepping out into the cool night air. The card rested against your palm now, glowing faintly in the darkness, as though it drew in every stray light and reshaped it. The street around you was silent. No lamps burned. No windows glowed. The world had folded into itself, emptied of all but you and the invitation. Somewhere far away, a sound stirred. A violin. Thin as thread, but unmistakable. The note lingered impossibly long, stretching across the silence like a finger pointing the way. And though you had never walked this path before, your feet knew the direction. The card in your hand pulsed once, twice. The rhythm of a conductor's baton. You followed. The streets gave way to stone steps to dirt path to a trail that climbed through the mist. The air was sharp with the smell of iron and rain. Each breath filled your chest with something colder than air, something that scraped faintly against your throat. The higher you climbed, the louder the sound grew. Not only a violin now, but layers beneath it, a faint percussion like distant drums, a sighing low tone that might have been a cello. The music tangled with the mist, drew it into shapes that shimmered before dissolving. Sometimes you thought you saw faces there, mouths open as though singing. The path curled upward, into a darkness that thickened with each step. And though fear prickled at the edges of your mind, though every instinct whispered for you to turn back, your body moved without hesitation. Because this was not a journey you had chosen. This was a summons. And the ticket in your hand was proof you had been expected. The path begins as though it had always been there, waiting for your feet. Stone steps, half swallowed by moss, rise from the edge of the forgotten road. They lead upward, winding into mist, the kind of mist that does not drift or swirl but hangs, thick and heavy, like a veil. It feels less like weather and more like breath, as though the mountain itself exhales, and you are climbing into its lungs. The air grows colder as you ascend. Not the playful chill of night, but a deep and patient cold, the kind that waits in places where sunlight has never touched. Each inhalation scratches faintly at your throat, metallic, tinged with the iron tang of blood. You press your hand against your chest as if to reassure yourself that your heart still beats beneath the silence. For silence has become a companion here. The world has muted itself. No crickets sing. No owl calls. Even the wind, though it moves the mist in faint shivers, carries no sound. Your footsteps are soft against the stone, and yet they echo faintly as though you walk through a corridor rather than an open path. Each step is repeated, multiplied, thrown back at you from somewhere deep within the mountain. And then, faintly, the music. At first, it seems like nothing more than the memory of sound, a thread of violin drifting across distance. A single note, high and fragile, stretched impossibly long. It hovers in the air, sometimes close, sometimes far, as if the mountain itself cannot decide how to carry it. You pause, straining your ears, and the mist thickens around you, blurring your edges, urging you onward. The ticket in your pocket warms against your thigh. With each note that trembles in the air, it beats once, like a second heart. You slip your fingers against it, and feel it respond, pulsing in rhythm with the violin's cry. It is not paper. It has never been paper. It is a summons written in flesh. The climb steepens. Roots twist across the path, gnarled and slick with dew. Your hand brushes against the stone wall to your right, and you feel it hum faintly beneath your palm, a vibration so subtle you wonder if it's your imagination. But as you leave your hand there, the vibration deepens, aligning with the distant rhythm of drums. The stone itself is resonant. The mountain is not only holding the sound, it is part of it. The mist thickens further, curling around your legs, your waist, your chest. It clings, heavy as cloth, until you feel you are wading rather than walking. Your breath quickens, fogging the air before you, though you cannot tell where your exhalation ends and the mountain's mist begins. And through it all, the music winds itself tighter, layering now, low, sighing tones like a cello groaning beneath weight, sharp plucks like fingers snapping bone. Your steps fall into rhythm. Without meaning to, you move in time with the music, your footfalls sinking to the drumbeat hidden deep in the mountain's chest. You try once to step out of time, to move against it, but your body resists, your muscles stuttering as though strings pull them from above. So you surrender. You walk in rhythm, every movement another note in the score. At times, shadows bloom in the mist ahead. Shapes that resemble people, bent and shrouded, lingering just beyond reach. They never solidify fully, never remain long enough for you to approach, but you know they are there. Perhaps they walk the path ahead of you, other summoned guests. Or perhaps they are what remains of those who came before. Each time you blink, they vanish. Each time you open your eyes again, they return, waiting, leading. The path curves. The incline sharpens. Your lungs ache with the climb, though you are not tired, not in the human sense. It is not fatigue of the body but something stranger, a thinning of the self. You feel your thoughts scatter more easily here, drifting away into the mist. You think of turning back, and the idea slips away before you can finish it. You try to recall your name, and the letters dissolve into the violin's endless note. You pass beneath an arch of stone, though no hands carved it. The rock itself has folded into shape, as if pressed by centuries of weight into the form of a doorway. It looms above you, dripping with condensation, and as you step through, you feel the faintest resistance, a membrane stretching across the threshold. For a moment you are submerged in silence thicker than any before. Then you emerge, breath rushing back, and the music surges louder, closer. The mist parts just enough for you to glimpse the world below. Far down, the valley lies in shadow, dotted with faint shapes of villages, rivers curling like veins through the land. But no lights glow there. No fires burn. No movement stirs. You realize, with a cold certainty, that no one waits for you below. That even if you turned and ran, there would be no doors to open, no hearths to welcome you, no eyes to see you. The mountain has already taken you. And so you keep climbing. The path narrows, the mist pressing tighter. The air thickens with sound now, as though the music has condensed into the atmosphere itself. Notes quiver at the edge of hearing, half-born screams woven into melody. When you breathe in, you taste them on your tongue, bitter and metallic, like copper shavings dissolving in your mouth. The stone walls rise higher around you, forming a channel that pulls you upward, deeper, inward. Your footsteps are no longer your own. They are part of the rhythm. The drumbeat has entered your chest fully now, each thud vibrating through your ribs. The violin threads through your veins. You are becoming an instrument yourself, carried forward, tuned by unseen hands. And then, at last, the path widens. The mist lifts, not dispersing but rising, coiling above your head like smoke drawn upward by fire. You step onto a broad ledge carved into the side of the mountain, and the world opens before you. There, carved into the stone as though the mountain were hollowed by a god's hand, lies the amphitheater. Its tiers of seats descend in perfect circles, vast and ancient, their edges cracked by time but unbroken in form. At the center lies the stage, an open wound of stone, waiting, humming faintly with the residue of sound. Lanterns hang suspended in the air, their flames pale and ghostly, swaying in a wind you cannot feel. Shadows shift within them, shapes that almost resemble faces. And beneath it all, the music pulses stronger, louder. You grip the ticket in your hand. It is no longer warm. It is hot. And it is beating in time with the orchestra that waits below. You realize it the moment your foot touches the first tier of stone. The air shifts around you, drawn inward as though the whole cavernous space inhales your presence. The mist does not vanish here, instead, it coils downward in thin spirals, sinking into the cracks of the stone, disappearing into the fractures as if the mountain itself feeds upon it. It is vast, impossibly vast. The mountain's skin has been peeled back to reveal an interior hollowed by forces too deliberate to be natural, yet too ancient to be human. The amphitheater curves downward in concentric rings, tier upon tier of broken seats cut directly from the stone, each worn smooth by centuries of weight. The stone is cracked, but not in ruin. Its damage feels more like scars, evidence of use, of pressure, of sound so heavy it split the very rock. You pause at the edge, your hand brushing against the cold surface of a weathered seat. The stone vibrates faintly, almost imperceptibly, a tremor not from the earth but from memory. You press your palm flat against it and feel a resonance still living in the grain. Though nothing plays yet, the amphitheater remembers every note ever performed within it. The sound is not gone. It lingers, etched into the rock like marrow into bone. The lanterns glow above the stage, suspended in the air as though hung from invisible cords. Their light is pale and sickly, a cold imitation of flame, but it illuminates enough for you to see the center. The stage is not a raised platform but a hollow depression in the earth, a scar carved into the heart of the amphitheater. The floor is smooth, polished unnaturally, as though countless feet have worn it down. At its center lies a mark, a circle bisected by a line, the same symbol carved into your ticket. You feel the tug of it immediately. The symbol calls to you, though it does not glow or move. It simply waits, patient, inevitable. All around, the tiers of stone rise in silent watchfulness. You glance upward, and for the first time, you realize that the walls of the amphitheater do not end where they should. They climb into darkness, tier upon tier upon tier, too many for the space to contain. They continue past sight, folding upward into an impossible abyss. The higher you look, the more your vision trembles, the seats repeating into infinity. It is not an amphitheater, it is a mouth, a pit, a well without end. And it is filled with listeners. They sit scattered across the tiers, cloaked in shadow, veiled in darkness. Figures frozen in silence, their faces obscured, their bodies too still. They do not shift, they do not stir, but you feel the weight of their attention pressing down upon you. Dozens, perhaps hundreds, perhaps more, depending on how far upward the tiers stretch. Their shapes are blurred, indistinct, but undeniable. They wait for the music. Your foot scuffs against the stone, and the sound echoes louder than it should, reverberating across the amphitheater in countless repetitions. It is a small sound, nothing more than leather on stone, but the space devours it, multiplies it, returns it to you transformed. The echoes ripple across the tiers like a wave disturbing water, and for the briefest moment, you see some of the shadowed figures tilt their heads in unison, acknowledging the sound, acknowledging you. The ticket in your hand grows hotter. You clutch it tightly, and it pulses once, then again, as if urging you forward. Each beat pushes your feet to move, step by step, down the tiered path toward the stage. The stone stairs curve downward in spirals, guiding you inexorably toward the hollow center. Every step deepens the weight in your chest, as though the air itself thickens with sound. You feel pressure in your ears, the faint thrum of something building, waiting. Halfway down, you pause. The stone beneath your hand shudders faintly, and for an instant you hear it, music. Not with your ears, but within your bones. A fragment of melody pressed into the rock itself, waiting centuries to be released. It is not beautiful. It is not meant to be. It is a sound like a ribcage cracking open. You withdraw your hand quickly, but the echo lingers in your arm, up your shoulder, into your chest. The stage grows larger with every step, its symbol pulling at you like gravity. By the time you reach the bottom tier, you no longer feel the climb behind you. There is no world beyond this hollow. The mountain has sealed itself, enclosing you in a circle of stone and shadow. The only reality left is the amphitheater, the stage, and the silent audience who watch from their veiled seats. You step into the center. The air changes immediately. It presses inward, dense and heavy, as though you have walked into the center of a great lung. The ground hums beneath your feet, a low vibration that climbs up your legs, into your spine, until your teeth ache with it. The lanterns above flicker once, their flames bending inward, drawn toward you as though by breath. You stand upon the symbol. It is not carved but burned into the stone, the edges blackened, charred. The circle feels endless, the line splitting it like a mouth opening in silence. You try to look away, but your eyes return to it again and again, drawn into its curve. For a moment, you imagine it widening beneath you, opening into a pit, swallowing you whole. But it does not open. Not yet. The music stirs faintly, rising like mist. Not played, not yet, but present, waiting at the edges of perception. It drifts through the stone, through the air, through the silent figures above. You realize, suddenly, that the amphitheater itself is an instrument. That every crack, every scar, every hollow seat has been carved not for audience, but for resonance. This place is not built to hold listeners. It is built to hold sound. And you are standing in the heart of it. The ticket in your hand burns now. Its heat sears your palm, and you drop it, flinching. But it does not fall. It hovers above the ground, spinning slowly, its glow intensifying, crimson deepening to black and back again. The letters on its surface flare, and the sound rises, faint, sharp, like the first stroke of a bow across a string. You glance upward. The figures in the tiers lean forward in unison. The lanterns flicker brighter. The amphitheater groans, its stones shifting faintly, as though something beneath them stirs. The ticket pulses one final time. Then it disintegrates into ash, scattering into the air, vanishing before it touches the ground. And the stage is ready. The amphitheater yawned before you like the hollowed chest of a god, vast and ribbed with cracked tiers of stone. Its walls, though chipped and weather-worn, seemed alive with the memory of voices that had once thundered through them, voices of ancient choirs, of solemn speeches, of long-forgotten hymns that had carved themselves into the mountain's marrow. The sound that lived here was older than any audience, older than any performer. Even before you stepped deeper into its belly, you felt it thrumming beneath your feet, a resonance that traveled up your legs and into your chest, rattling against the cage of your ribs as though trying to coax out a note of your own. But it was not the amphitheater's cracked beauty that held your breath captive. It was them. The seats. The audience. You hadn't noticed them immediately. Shadows have a way of blending into stone, of pretending they are nothing more than the absence of light. But as you descended the steps, the mist thinning just enough for your eyes to adjust, you realized you were not alone. The tiered seats were full. Every cracked bench and fractured row was occupied, shoulder to shoulder, row upon row. Dozens of figures, perhaps hundreds, sat in perfect stillness. At first you told yourself they were statues, remnants of some lost civilization, an audience carved to honor a performance never played. But statues do not breathe. They do not tilt their heads in the subtlest motion as one enters their midst. And as the pale lanterns on the stage guttered to life in a line of ghostly fire, you saw it clearly, they were people, or something that had once been people. They were shrouded. Every figure sat cloaked in a veil of shadow, so dense that the faint lantern glow could not penetrate it. Their forms were outlined, yes, the slope of shoulders, the turn of a head, the folded arrangement of hands upon laps. But their faces were obscured. No glimmer of eye or curve of cheek. Just darkness, as though each of them wore a mask woven from the absence of light itself. Your footsteps echoed as you moved, hesitant, down the central aisle. And with each step, that echo seemed to be swallowed, muffled by the very audience itself. As though sound died when it touched them. The silence was unbearable. You tried not to stare, but it was impossible. Every figure was angled just slightly toward you, their shrouded faces following your progress. You could feel the weight of their unseen eyes, pressing like fingers against your temples. The strange thing, or perhaps the strangest of many strange things, was that you felt no hostility in their stillness. No malice, no threat. Instead, it was expectation. A waiting so profound it became suffocating. They were not here to harm you. They were here to witness. But what? You passed a row where one of the shadowed figures sat slumped, chin bowed low, the veil of darkness cascading down as though their head hung in eternal sleep. For a flicker of a moment, you thought you saw a hand, pale, thin, bones too prominent, skin sagging like old parchment, clutching the armrest. And then it was gone, lost in the gloom. The air grew thicker as you descended toward the front rows, closer to the stage. You realized with a jolt of unease that none of them moved. Not even to breathe. You had seen the faint motion earlier, but now, nothing. No rise of chest, no shift of posture. They were seated as though embalmed, preserved in shadow, waiting for a cue. You Saturday. You don't know why. Perhaps because to stand in their midst felt too exposed, too conspicuous. Perhaps because you feared that if you remained upright, you would block their view, and whatever punished breaches of etiquette here would fall upon you. Or perhaps because some deeper instinct whispered that the audience was not merely an assembly, it was a ritual. And rituals demanded participation. The stone seat was cold beneath you, sending a chill through your spine. The figure to your left sat inches away, the shadow of their form almost brushing yours. Though you could not see a face, you swore you felt its attention, angled toward you, silent and unblinking. You forced yourself to look forward. The stage glowed faintly under its lanterns. The instruments lay waiting, grotesque things fashioned from the anatomy of the dead. A violin bow strung with hair. A cello whose polished surface was not wood, but bone, smoothed and gleaming ivory. Drums taut with stretched, pallid skin. Flutes with mouthpieces that looked too much like open throats. And yet, despite the horror of it, you knew with certainty that none of it was for you. Not yet. This place was not built for your gaze. It was built for theirs. The audience of shadows. You glanced sidelong once more. You should not have. For a moment, just a single heartbeat, the veil of darkness parted around the nearest figure's face. You saw pale skin, wrinkled and cracked like dry clay. A mouth sewn shut with coarse black thread. And the faintest tremor in the threads as though, beneath them, the mouth still tried to whisper. Your breath hitched. The veil fell back into place. The figure was silent again. Still again. You stared forward, trembling, gripping the stone seat as though it could anchor you. You told yourself not to look again, not to search the rows for other glimpses of what lay beneath. But you could not help it. Your eyes betrayed you, darting quick, hungry glances. And once seen, the pattern revealed itself. Every shadowed face in the amphitheater was veiled. Every mouth was sewn shut. The audience could not speak. They could not scream. They could not sing. They could only listen. And as that realization settled into your bones, the faintest sound rose around you. Not from the stage. Not from the instruments. From the audience itself. It was not breath. It was not whisper. It was vibration, a low, almost inaudible hum that seemed to seep out of their bodies, their bound mouths, their sealed throats. It was the sound of yearning, of hunger, of a desire so intense it had bent them into silence for eternity. You clutched your arms around yourself, trying not to shake. You tried to tell yourself you were imagining it. That the hum was your own blood, rushing hot and frantic through your ears. But then the conductor appeared. The silence before it begins is immense, almost unbearable. It hangs over the amphitheater like a suffocating veil, pressing against your skin, filling the cavities of your lungs until even breathing feels like a betrayal. You are surrounded by an audience that does not stir, figures wrapped in shadow, each one as still as a carved idol. They lean slightly forward, their heads bowed not in prayer but in expectation, as though every breathless second is a thread strung too tight across some hidden instrument. The tension hums in the bones of the earth. You feel it in the soles of your feet, in the hollow of your ribs, as though your very skeleton is vibrating in anticipation of what is about to come. And then, the bow rises. At first you almost miss it. On the stage, beneath the flickering lanterns that burn without smoke, a figure has stepped forward. The orchestra is there already, assembled in their funereal silence, cradling their strange, grotesque instruments of bone and flesh. Yet your eyes are drawn not to them, not even to the eyeless conductor who stands tall at the center, but to a single violinist. His posture is rigid, head slightly cocked to one side, as if listening to something beneath the ground. His face is obscured by shadow, his body barely defined beneath robes that seem more like tattered burial shrouds than garments meant for the living. The violin he holds is not a violin at all, not in any world you know. Its frame gleams pale, carved from the ribcage of something almost human. The strings shimmer like wet sinew, glistening faintly in the lantern light. But it is the bow that captures you, that arrests your thoughts so fully you forget to swallow, forget to breathe. It is made of a single long rib, polished and thin, curved into the familiar arc of a violin bow. Yet instead of horsehairs strung across its length, strands of something darker hang taut. You know instinctively what they are, and the realization turns your stomach. Human hair, long and brittle, stretched in uneven cords, whispering against itself in the stillness. The bow hovers for a moment above the strings, waiting, suspended, as though the entire amphitheater itself is holding its breath in unison. And when it descends, gently, almost reverently, the first note is born. It is not sound as you know sound. It does not begin in the air and enter your ears. No, it blossoms within your chest. The note slides into being as though it has always been there, as though the space between your lungs has been a hollow waiting for it, an instrument awaiting its first breath of music. It is thin at first, delicate, like the whisper of a knife drawn across glass. It trembles in you, fragile but unrelenting, piercing deeper than any ordinary sound could. The note grows, layering upon itself. It is as though each vibration multiplies, rebounding off the stone walls of the amphitheater, folding back into itself until it no longer seems like a single violin but 100 voices all crying out the same eternal syllable. The air thickens with it, the lantern swaying as if shuddering to the music. Your bones ache. Your teeth hum. And beneath all of that, a whisper threads itself into your consciousness, not words, not quite, but intent. Something in the music speaks without language, an insistence that you listen not with ears but with marrow, with memory, with the fragile architecture of your soul. You try to turn your head, to glance at the others seated near you, but your body resists. It is as though the note has caught you, like a hook embedded under the skin. Your gaze is fixed upon the violinist's bow, upon the slow, deliberate sweep across the strings. The shadows that make up his face seem to shift, or maybe they do not. Maybe the note itself paints expressions where there are none. In one moment you imagine his mouth wide, screaming in silence, in another, you are certain his face is serene, eyes closed, lips parted as though in prayer. The uncertainty itself is dizzying. And the sound, it does not stop. It stretches far beyond what should be possible. A single note, held endlessly, but it is not static. It evolves. At first high and crystalline, it begins to fracture, splitting into harmonics that curl in the edges of your perception. You hear laughter in it, distant, childlike, yet twisted. You hear sobbing buried beneath the higher pitch, muffled as though from beneath the earth. You hear your own name, almost, but no, it cannot be. And still the note continues, unraveling itself into a spectrum of horrors and intimacies you did not consent to hear. Your pulse has quickened. You realize with sudden clarity that it is no longer your own. Each beat sinks to the tremor of the note, each contraction of your heart echoing its rhythm. You are not entirely certain when this happened, but you are helpless against it now. Your body is an instrument, resonating with the violin, made part of the performance without permission. From the corner of your eye, you sense the audience stir, not physically, not in any visible way. Their shadows remain locked in place, still as statues. Yet there is movement beneath their stillness, something you feel rather than see. Their forms ripple, the air around them quivering like heat rising from stone. They, too, are resonating. They, too, are caught in this first note, strung along by invisible threads. You realize suddenly that you are not merely witnessing this performance. You are a participant, one of countless silent bodies arranged to be played upon like an unseen instrument. The note deepens. It plunges lower, pulling something out of you with it. The higher cries fade, leaving a drone that rattles your bones, settling into your stomach like a stone dropped into deep water. Your thoughts blur. For a moment, you cannot recall what brought you here, how you climbed the mountain path, what existed before this moment. It is as though the note erases not only silence but memory itself, scraping it clean with each vibration. You clutch at your mind, desperate to anchor yourself. The ticket, yes, you remember the ticket, crimson and damp with ink or blood. You remember the climb, the mist, the lanterns. You remember the amphitheater, the shadows. You cling to these fragments, but they feel fragile, already slipping between your fingers. Each second the note continues, another thread loosens from your tapestry of self. Soon there will be nothing left. The violinist does not waver. His hand guides the bow with inhuman steadiness, unbroken, his entire form devoted to sustaining this impossible sound. He is not playing, he is channeling, drawing forth something that existed long before the concept of music itself, something primal that crawls beneath the skin of all living things. You know this in your core. This note has no beginning, no end. It is eternal, and you have only been allowed to step briefly into its river. And then, with no warning, it breaks. The bow jerks sharply across the strings, tearing the note into silence. The sudden absence is catastrophic. It is as though the earth itself has been ripped away from beneath you, leaving you suspended in void. Your ears ring, not from the sound but from the violence of its absence. You gasp, lungs suddenly aware of air again, throat roar as though you had been screaming the entire time. But the silence is not empty. In the wake of the note, something lingers. Whispers thread through the air, so faint they might be imagined. The shadows in the audience shift, not visibly, but perceptibly, as though settling deeper into themselves. And within your chest, where the music had taken root, there is a hollow ache, a missing piece. You feel lighter, yes, but also diminished, as though a fragment of you was carried away in that first sound and will never return. The violinist lowers his bow. The orchestra stirs. One by one, other instruments lift into readiness, the pale shapes of bone cellos, the stretched skin drums, the moaning flutes. Their players shift in their seats, hands skeletal or shrouded, moving with ritualistic precision. The conductor raises his staff of vertebrae, tilting it toward the orchestra with grave finality. And you know, with sick certainty, that the first note was only the beginning. At first, you try to tell yourself that they are merely props, grotesque, yes, but crafted by human hands for the sake of some strange performance. That is the lie you whisper to yourself in order to endure. But as your gaze lingers, as your eyes adjust to the lantern glow that caresses every corner of the stage, the truth refuses to be smothered. These instruments breathe. They pulse. They twitch as if animated not by strings and wood but by veins, tendons, and a will that refuses to rest. The violin nearest the conductor is carved entirely of rib bones, rib after rib smoothed into a curving frame. Its body is hollow, yet every time the bow, fashioned from a long, yellowed radius bone strung with human hair, is drawn across its strings, you swear you see the thin wires tremble like nerves being plucked raw. The air that rises from it does not feel like sound alone, but like the vibration of marrow shivering inside your own skeleton. It stirs something involuntary in your body, as though your bones remember the violin, as though your blood recognizes the notes like a forgotten hymn. The cellos are worse. They loom at the edge of the stage, each taller than a man, their bodies curved from the fused spines of many. Vertebrae stacked like beads, fused into one hideous shape. The hollows of hips have been shaved smooth to create resonant chambers, and over them stretch thin veils of skin, some dry, translucent, and papery, others still holding a glisten as though newly stripped. When the cellist, if one can even call the faceless shadow crouched there a musician, draws its bow across, the sound is not deep and noble as a cello should be, but cavernous, groaning, as if the earth itself were trying to speak through broken teeth. And in that groan there is a human timbre. A cry muffled, trapped, echoing within the very material of the instrument. You lean forward before you can stop yourself, trying to hear if that moan forms words, if perhaps some fragment of soul still lingers in the stitched sinew that holds it taut. And then, horribly, you feel it, a thought not your own, brushing across your mind like cold fingertips. Whose spine do you wear, my child? You tear your gaze away, heart pounding, throat tightening against a scream. The thought dissolves, but not completely. It lingers at the edge of your consciousness like an aftertaste of rot. Farther down the stage, the percussionist waits behind an array of drums. At first they seem carved from wood, but then you realize the shells are rounded skulls, the jawbones bound shut with wire. Over them are stretched skins, thin and translucent, but still patterned with faint freckles, or a curling scar, or the ghost of hair. Some are stitched crudely together from several hides, forming uneven patches. When struck, they do not sound like the taut brilliance of a drum. Instead they give off a thick, meaty thud, like the sound of a fist pounding against a chest. With each beat, you feel your own ribcage tremble, your lungs fluttering in resistance. The flutes are no relief. Their hollow bodies are carved from long bones, femurs and tibia smoothed and polished until they gleam in the ghost light. The holes punctured into them are too neat, too deliberate, as if someone measured not for pitch but for agony. When breath is forced through them, by players who seem not to breathe at all, the sound that issues forth is not a sweet melody but a low, rasping exhale. The closest comparison you can imagine is the sigh of someone dying, stretched and frozen into eternity. Some of the flutes weep faintly when played, a wetness gathering at the holes that glistens in the lantern glow. You do not want to consider what liquid it might be, or whether it comes from the instrument itself or from whatever spirit lingers within. The harp looms like a grotesque centerpiece, its frame the shape of a ribcage, larger than any human could ever possess, impossibly grand, as if the bones of a titan were unearthed and twisted into song. The strings are strands of hair, some black, some white, some still with flecks of scalp clinging where the root was torn free. When the harp is plucked, the notes shimmer not like gold but like steel scraping on stone. Yet the resonance is undeniable. The sound cuts clean through the other instruments, weaving them together into something whole, something ritualistic. Each string vibrates as if eager, almost hungry, trembling as if straining to leap from the harp itself and into the air, into you. And there are instruments you do not have words for. Things that might have once been organs now hollowed and reshaped. Pipes of cartilage coiled like intestines. Horns that resemble jaws frozen mid-scream, their teeth polished until they gleam like ivory. There is even one monstrous contraption set far at the back, something like an organ, its pipes a forest of femurs, pelvises, and shoulder blades fused together, towering into the mist overhead. You dread the moment it will play, for the silence around it feels like a predator waiting, biding its time. But worse than the sight, worse even than the sound, is the undeniable sensation that all of it was once alive. These were not anonymous relics scavenged from graveyards. No, the bones are too clean, too perfect, too recent. The hair still shines with oils. The skin has not fully withered. And the voices, yes, the voices, whisper faintly beneath the music. You begin to hear them now, threading between the notes. Murmurs and sighs, pleas you cannot quite catch. Sometimes a cry rises sharp and clear, a single syllable bursting through the symphony before being smothered again. You look to the audience around you, those veiled shadows seated in silence, and you cannot shake the suspicion that these instruments once belonged to them. That each cello, each flute, each stretched skin and strung hair was carved from someone who sat here, listening, until the music claimed them. Perhaps that is the bargain: listen long enough, and you will provide your body to sustain the next performance. Your gaze drifts unwillingly back to the cello nearest to you. Its frame is familiar in some ghastly way, though you cannot say why. A notch in one vertebra, a crooked tilt of the spine, it gnaws at your memory like a half-forgotten face. You imagine running your hand down your own back, feeling the ridges of bone beneath your skin, and suddenly you know. The cello was once someone very much like you. A listener. A wanderer. A guest who thought themselves an audience but became part of the song. The cellist's bow rises. It draws across the strings again. And this time, the moan that emerges is unmistakable. A voice, ragged, aching, human. It whispers in a tone so faint you think you must have imagined it. Help me. Your breath falters. You grip the edge of your seat, nails biting into the stone. The shadow beside you does not move, does not react. No one else seems to hear it. Only you. And you realize, in a moment of sickening clarity, that the music is not only performed with these bodies, it is performed through them. Every sound is a fragment of soul, pressed into service, played endlessly, movement after movement, until nothing remains but silence. The instruments twitch faintly when not played, as though impatient. You see the violin strings quiver on their own, the harp's hair strands ripple though no hand touches them. One of the drums contracts slightly, as though something within is trying to breathe. The stage is alive. The instruments are alive. And the orchestra hungers. The silence that followed the last shiver of bone string was not silence at all. It was a waiting thing, dense and trembling, as though the air itself held its breath for what would come next. Lantern-light guttered, their bluish flames bending toward the stage as if pulled by some gravity older than the mountain itself. Even the shadows that draped the unmoving audience leaned forward, attentive, eager, hungry. It was then you saw him. The conductor did not enter so much as emerge, as though the stage had been waiting to exhale him all along. One moment, the stone was empty except for the grotesque instruments resting in skeletal hands. The next, the figure was simply there, tall, robed, and terrible in stillness. His garments dragged across the ground like fluid shadow, pooling and rippling though no wind stirred in this hollow of the earth. The fabric was neither cloth nor smoke, but something in between, its folds trembling faintly as though alive, each ripple whispering like distant voices. You stared longer, and the realization arrived with a sickness in your chest. The robes were stitched together from veils. Dozens, perhaps hundreds, of mourning veils layered over one another, their edges blackened and frayed. At times, as the lantern swayed, you caught the pale outlines of faces imprinted in their folds, eyes closed, mouths open mid-wail, blurred as if waterlogged. These were not garments, not protection, not regalia. They were memory skins, remnants of grief that had been collected, bound, and worn. The conductor's head was bare, and though you tried to will yourself to describe his face, language resisted. His skin was smooth where eyes should have been, a pale surface unbroken except for faint lines that shimmered faintly in lantern light, like veins of quartz running through marble. That eyeless mask reflected everything and nothing at once, the trembling flame, the hunched shadows, even your own silhouette distorted. Looking upon it felt like being seen from the inside out, as though those blind ridges did not need eyes at all to strip you bare. The mouth was worse. It was not sewn shut, nor hidden, but fixed in a shape you could not name, not quite open, not quite closed, as if the figure hovered forever between speech and silence. A crease at the corners curled upward in something like a smile, but one utterly without warmth, as though joy had been extracted and left only the husk of its motion. He carried a staff in his hand, long and pale, polished to a sheen so slick it caught the blue lantern glow and fractured it into thin, spectral lines. It was made of vertebrae. You knew it instantly, the recognition leaping at you with primal certainty, a spine, still strung in perfect order, each bone locked into the next with unnatural precision. Yet as the conductor raised it slightly, you saw the staff twitch. Not with his movement, but with its own. The bones shivered faintly, as though trying to recoil from their own arrangement, their sockets flexing like mouths attempting to form speech. At times the base of it pulsed, a faint rhythm like a heartbeat, far too steady to be mistake. Someone's spine had been stolen, and it had not forgotten that it once held a life. The conductor lifted the staff higher, and an unnatural weight pressed into your chest. You felt your own heart rise to meet it, unwilling and yet tethered. The moment his hand shifted upward, your pulse obeyed. The muscles in your ribs tightened, compelled as if invisible strings had tied your flesh to his movements. The audience of shadows did not stir, not with flesh at least. But their outlines flickered, their veils rippling faintly. A hush settled deeper across the amphitheater, a hush that was not absence but attention sharpened into a blade. All leaned toward him. All obeyed. The conductor extended his arm, robes flowing down in rivulets of black fabric, the veiled faces in their seams whispering faint sighs as though the mere gesture called them awake. His vertebrae staff came to rest before him like a standard of conquest. He did not tap it against the ground. He did not move with flourish. He merely stood, and the weight of his presence alone aligned every breath in the hollow. Even your lungs betrayed you, pausing until you thought you might choke, before falling in line with the rhythm he dictated without sound. Your eyes ached from staring, but you could not look away. The eyeless face pulled at your vision, as though every thread of thought was being rewoven into a single fixation, him. The robed figure was more than a man, more than an entity, he was a fulcrum, a pivot upon which sound and silence balanced. You sensed that even the mountain itself bent around him, its stone ribs groaning faintly, the earth shifting as though it too remembered his dominion. When the conductor finally moved again, the gesture was minute, the faintest tilt of his spine, the slow incline of his staff. Yet the effect was immediate and cataclysmic. The air shuddered. Not with sound, not yet, but with pressure, like the prelude to thunder. The instruments stirred in their holders' hands, twitching with eagerness, their sinews quivering, drum skins tightening. The cello carved from femurs hummed faintly, though no bow touched its strings. The flute of ivory exhaled a sigh, moist and shivering. Even the violin of ribs leaned forward in its player's grasp as though yearning for permission. The conductor's eyeless face lifted, lantern light reflecting across that blank, ridged surface like water scattering across glass. His robes rippled though no wind stirred. His staff's vertebrae clattered faintly, not in chaos but in perfect alignment, each bone speaking to the next like notes in a phrase. And with that, you felt it again, your heart, no longer yours, falling into rhythm with his command. A single beat pulsed at the back of your skull, thick and insistent, as though your blood itself had become sheet music waiting for his hand. The conductor opened his mouth a fraction wider. A soundless intake. A breath of absence. And every shadow in the audience leaned forward, every flicker of lantern flame bent lower, every instrument trembled, waiting for the first command. For the briefest, most terrible moment, you knew, beyond doubt, that when the conductor raised his hand in earnest, you would not be able to resist. You would stand when he bid you stand, breathe when he bid you breathe, and bleed when he bid you bleed. Because this was not a performance. This was a ritual. And the figure before you, eyeless and robed in grief, was not merely a guide of music. He was the master of silence itself. The conductor stood poised in silence, its eyeless face reflecting lantern light like the surface of pale, stagnant water. Around it, the orchestra trembled in anticipation, bows raised, breath drawn, skeletal fingers flexing against strings that glistened with faint wetness. And then, with a motion almost delicate, the vertebrae staff sliced through the air. The instant it moved, your body felt it. Not in the ears. Not in the mind. But in the chest. The first note was not played so much as grown, as though the amphitheater itself birthed it from ancient stone lungs. The sound bloomed inward, not outward, pressing into you like a hand pushing between your ribs. Your heart shuddered, faltered, then caught again, slower, heavier, and undeniably synchronized with the rhythm now unfurling across the stage. The violins began their strange labor. Each bow, drawn not from wood and horsehair but from rib and tendon, scraped across strings that shrieked in something between music and agony. Yet as grotesque as the tone should have been, there was order within it. A structure. You realized, with an unsettling certainty, that the sound mapped itself across your body. Each instrument claimed a piece of you, a violin vibrating in your pulse, a drum settling into the hollow of your lungs, a low cello weaving through your bones like marrow replaced with resonance. You inhaled, and the sound followed, surging into your throat, lining the inside of your windpipe with trembling harmonics. You exhaled, and the same sound spilled out, woven into your breath without your consent. Slowly, your breathing was no longer your own. It belonged to the score. The flutes joined next. Not smooth, bright air but broken reeds of bone, their tones wavering and mournful. Each note slithered across your skin, finding pores and follicles, creeping inward. Your veins pulsed visibly beneath your skin, blue rivers lit from within by rhythm. You could feel each artery squeeze and relax, perfectly on time, as if the orchestra had slipped beneath your flesh and assumed command of your circulation. The music did not merely exist, it inhabited. It claimed your body the way ivy claims stone, rooting, tightening, reshaping. And though part of you recoiled in terror, another part surrendered too easily. Because it was easier. Because to fight would mean ripping against sound itself, and sound had always been stronger than flesh. The shadows in the audience shifted almost imperceptibly. They did not clap, did not breathe, but their outlines quivered in rhythm, like smoke disturbed by unseen air. You realized with growing dread that they, too, pulsed with the symphony. Each figure's chest rose and fell exactly when yours did. Every heartbeat ached in unison, 100 unseen hearts fused into one slow, deliberate rhythm. The orchestra wasn't playing for them, it was playing through them. Through you. Through everyone present. The conductor's staff trembled as though alive, the vertebrae writhing against one another in miniature spasms. It held the motion high, and with each sweep, your vision blurred. The lanterns doubled, then tripled, as though time itself had stuttered. A bow descended and you swore you felt your blood change direction in your veins, reversing for one impossible instant before correcting. The music thickened. Not in volume, but in presence. The air between notes became tangible, like walking through mist that clung to your lips and eyes. You could taste it, bitter copper, like blood sucked from a wound. When the violin scraped into their next measure, you gagged without meaning to, as though the sound had grown claws and hooked itself behind your tongue. Then came the rhythm of the drums, hide stretched tight across frames made of pelvic bone, struck with mallets that left faint bruises on the air. Each beat landed square in your sternum, hammering into your chest cavity until you swore your ribs rattled. Your heartbeat obeyed. No longer erratic, no longer yours, it beat exactly in time with the percussion. And though it terrified you, there was a clarity in it. A relief. To no longer have to keep time yourself. To simply surrender to the rhythm and let it carry you, like waves. The first movement was not a song, it was a grafting. The orchestra wasn't performing for an audience, it was weaving its audience into itself. You glanced at the shadow seated nearest to you. It had not moved all evening, its face hidden beneath a curtain of blackness that seemed to swallow even the lantern glow. Yet now, you noticed the faintest tremor ripple through its outline. Its shoulders lifted exactly when yours did. Its hands, pale, long, and veined, twitched faintly with each drum beat. And then, for the first time, it tilted its head toward you. You caught no face, no eyes, only the recognition of shared rhythm. You were one of them, whether you wished it or not. The string swelled, and the amphitheater groaned in sympathy. Cracks widened in the stone, moss shuddered loose, dust trembled upward instead of down. The mountain itself was listening, its vast body reverberating like a hidden chamber of bone. The air trembled, thick as muscle tissue stretched too tight. Your sense of time unraveled. Seconds stretched long enough to breathe 100 times in the space of one bow stroke, then collapsed so violently that entire passages of sound vanished, leaving you uncertain whether you had lost them, or they had stolen them from you. The music did not flow forward. It folded. It devoured its own chronology. Somewhere inside you, your old heartbeat still tried to rebel. You could feel it stammering against the imposed rhythm, desperate to regain control. For a moment, a fragment of who you were, a name, a memory, a fleeting thought, rose to the surface. And then the violin seized it. They plucked that thought like a string, stretched it thin, and erased it into resonance. You gasped, realizing with horror you could no longer remember what the thought had been. Something personal, something important, dissolved into music as though it had never been. The conductor's head tilted as though listening. Though it had no eyes, you felt its gaze pierce you. A shiver ran up your spine, and with it, the orchestra tightened its grip. The notes burrowed deeper, spreading like roots through marrow, and the movement pressed on, slow, inevitable, ritualistic. There was no applause. There was no silence. There was only the endless, living rhythm. And with each note, a little more of you belonged not to yourself, but to them. The first movement had settled into you like a sickness. Its rhythm still throbbed faintly in your chest, not as a sound anymore but as a memory that kept pulsing even when the orchestra paused, as if your veins had learned a new language and refused to stop speaking it. You could still feel the way time had buckled and bent around those notes, how your heartbeat was no longer entirely your own, how something inside you had loosened and now dangled like a puppet string waiting for the next tug. And it came, in the hush between movements, the conductor's vertebrae staff twitched like a dying serpent, and the musicians hunched deeper over their impossible instruments. Then the air shifted, and what followed was not a note, not even sound in the conventional sense, but a vibration that crawled up through the stone benches, through your shoes, through your bones, until your teeth ached. The second movement had begun. At first, it was subtle, the faintest hiss, like air escaping through cracks in a coffin lid, or breath caught beneath the floorboards of a forgotten house. It slithered beneath the grand bowing of ribs on strings, beneath the moan of bone flutes, beneath the skin drum's cavernous rumble. You might have dismissed it as wind moving through the amphitheater's ruins. But then it took shape. The hissing fractured, branched, multiplied, and became voices. They were quiet, nearly inaudible, as though whispered from behind a wall of water. Yet unmistakably, they were human. Dozens of them at once, each pressed upon the other, overlapping in their desperate murmurings. They rose from beneath the very seats of the amphitheater, from the cracks in the ancient stone, from the hollow spaces in the earth. Whispers threading together like the rustling of dry leaves. "Let me out, not again, please not again, it hurts to listen, it hurts to remember, they keep us hungry, they keep us awake." The words were broken, fragmented, but insistent. The more the orchestra played, the stronger the voices became, until you could no longer separate the sound of the instruments from the whispers of the dead. The music and the voices bled together, as though the orchestra's bone and sinew instruments were not only producing sound but also dredging up the cries of those who had once owned them. And then you realized what was happening. The whispers were beneath you. They were inside the stone benches where you and the shadow audience sat today. They were in the soil. They were buried just beneath your feet, pressed like seeds into the mountain, and the music was coaxing them upward, tugging at their throats, forcing their voices into the air. The audience of shadows did not move, did not stir, but you now wondered if they had once been as vocal as the whispers, until they had been hollowed, silenced, stilled into statues of shade. You leaned forward, unthinking, trying to catch the words more clearly. The sound was a tide, rising and falling with the orchestra's pitch. When the flutes moaned, the whispers became mournful sobs. When the drums thundered, the voices grew panicked, shrieking and scrambling. And when the violins dragged their rib bows across stretched sinew, the whispers took on rhythm, forming words with terrible precision. "Your face will be forgotten, your name is already gone, they took my hands, they took my eyes, they took my voice, but still I sing for them, the bones are never ours." Once they touched the strings, you gripped the arm of your stone seat, trying to steady yourself, but the stone itself seemed to breathe beneath your hand, pulsing with each whisper. You wanted to stand, to leave, but the moment you shifted your weight forward you realized how heavy your body had become. The music had thickened your blood, had anchored you. Your muscles answered, but sluggishly, like limbs roused from a deep paralysis. And worse, the whispers had begun addressing you directly. "You shouldn't have come," one hissed, low and close, as though spoken into your ear by lips you could not see. "You're one of us now," said another, trembling, resigned. "They know your name already," whispered a third. "Do you feel how it loosens, syllable by syllable, every time the bow draws across the strings? Soon, you won't remember it either." You tried, instinctively, to say your name under your breath, to tether yourself to it, but the syllables faltered in your mouth. They tasted strange, foreign, as though you were reciting someone else's name, one that had been loaned to you only temporarily. The orchestra swelled, and with it, the whispers grew bolder. Their voices overlapped in grotesque harmony, a chorus of despair threading through every note. Some begged. Some cursed. Some simply repeated fragments, phrases like broken records. "It's cold in the soil, cold in the soil, cold in the soil." My mouth was sewn shut, but still the song found me. The conductor does not see with eyes. He sees with marrow. He sees with loss. And then came the worst of it. At first, you thought it was coincidence, the vague familiarity of a tone, a rhythm in the voices. But soon, you recognized one voice among them. Not just any voice, but one that belonged to your past, to a memory you had not summoned in years. A childhood friend, gone too early, their voice unmistakable in its breathless lilt. They whispered your name. Not once. Not twice. Over and over, as if pleading for you to acknowledge them. The orchestra swelled again, and with the swell came more. A voice that sounded like your grandmother, long dead, the edges of her words frayed with age. Another like your father, not as you knew him living, but as though waterlogged, drowned, each word gurgling. They called to you, weaving themselves into the second movement, blending memory with horror until you could not tell whether the music was dredging them from the earth or from your own mind. "I told you never to follow shadows," your grandmother's voice croaked. "You should have stayed home," your friend whispered. "Blood remembers blood," your father's drowned echo muttered. You tried to cover your ears, to shut it out, but the whispers were not in your ears. They were inside you, resonating against your ribs, curling through your veins like smoke. Even if you tore your flesh away, you suspected they would keep speaking, because they were part of the song now, and the song was inside you. The conductor raised its staff, vertebrae twitching as though gnawed by invisible teeth. At that motion, the whispers grew frantic. They did not want the second movement to end. They pleaded with you to listen, to remember them, to repeat their names before the silence reclaimed them. Their desperation was unbearable. But the orchestra did not care. The conductor's staff came down. The musicians scraped, struck, howled their grotesque instruments, and the whispers rose into a shriek so piercing that the amphitheater itself seemed to quake. Dust fell from the cracked stone. The lanterns guttered. The shadows in the seats shifted almost imperceptibly, as though stirred by the shriek, though still they did not lift their veils. And then, silence. The whispers were cut off, not faded, not diminished, cut. One moment they clamored in agony and recognition, the next they were gone, as if a blade had sliced through their throats all at once. The silence left behind was monstrous, too sudden, too complete. It pressed against your skull, stuffed your lungs, made you realize that the whispers had been not just background sound but the very air you breathed. Without them, the silence was suffocating. The second movement was over. But you felt its mark deep inside you. Those voices had not vanished entirely. They clung to you like damp clothes on skin. They had burrowed into memory, and you knew, with a bone-deep certainty that left you shivering, that you would never be rid of them. And worse, you had begun to recognize more of them. If the third movement was what you feared it might be, you knew it would not stop at voices. It would take more. It would take you. The sound began to swell again, rising not in volume but in density, as though every note carried weight, thick, clotted weight that pressed against your chest, filling the hollows of your lungs with something heavier than air. The strings bent and trembled, their resonance like the tightening of nerves, while the skin drums rolled in a low and steady thrum, reminiscent of something too primal, too bodily, like the stretched drum of your own skull echoing from within. You felt the hairs on your arms prick, not from cold but from recognition. The shadows around you stirred. Until now they had been still, statues in their silence, but as the third movement took hold, their forms began to unravel, not quickly, not violently, but with a languid, almost reverent grace. It began at the edges, the folds of their garments fraying into wisps, their outlines trembling as though their bodies had become smoke too stubborn to disperse. Yet this was no ordinary disintegration, it was not ash, nor mist, nor dust. It was sound. Their bodies blurred into chords, faces softening into harmonies, their eyes glowing faintly before dissolving into vibrating motes of tone. One figure just 2 rows ahead began to sway as the cello's bow dragged long across its strings. The sound curved in the air like a blade wrapped in velvet, and with each draw of bow across bone, the figure's shoulder unraveled into strands of trembling resonance. At first you thought it might scream, but no sound came, not from its mouth. Instead, the cello absorbed it, fed upon it, drew its soul through invisible threads. Its body seemed to fold inward, collapsing into the hollow music that claimed it, until at last there was nothing left but an echo circling faintly where it had once Saturday. You did not flinch. You couldn't. Something inside you insisted that this was not horror but inevitability, not violence but belonging. This was how it was meant to happen. Beside you, another shadow twitched. You turned slowly, every movement heavy as though the sound itself pinned you down. The figure was indistinct, faceless, shrouded as all the others had been, but you realized now that its silence was deceptive. There was a sound beneath it, an almost imperceptible murmur like breath on glass. You leaned closer, against your own better judgment, and in that tremor of sound you thought you heard the faintest trace of a name. A name you knew. Your stomach hollowed, but your body leaned closer still. The figure did not look at you, it had no face to turn, but you swore it knew you. It began to unravel, thread by thread, not into smoke but into vibration. Its shoulders lifted, trembled, and then dissolved into trembling resonance that spun like a thin ribbon in the air. Its chest opened, not with tearing or splitting, but with the slow reveal of silence turned into song. The audience member's essence folded outward, an invisible choir singing the body away until only its presence remained. The seat emptied. But you felt it then, the impossible paradox, the absence of weight becoming a new pressure. The seat was vacant, yet it was not empty. The space itself seemed fuller than before, as though the shadow's essence had not left but rather shifted into a form you could not comprehend. Something pressed against your ribs, invisible yet undeniable. The seat beside you had grown heavy with presence, as though the departed shadow had not gone but had entered you, slipping into the cracks the music was opening inside. You tried not to breathe, but the music breathed for you. The orchestra played on, tireless, ritualistic, its living instruments twitching in grotesque ecstasy. Every bow stroke flayed another sliver of shadow from the audience, every strike of the drum peeled away another husk of form. One by one, the figures dissolved, not violently, not all at once, but with the slow reverence of candles guttering out. Their silence became part of the harmony, and their absence filled the air until the amphitheater seemed thick with invisible presences. You felt it again, that uncanny gravity. Each time a figure dissolved, each time a shadow surrendered, the seat beside you grew heavier, though still empty to the eye. It was as if all that unmade essence was flowing, seat by seat, inward toward you. You sat in your chair as though upon an altar, surrounded by the departed whose voices hummed now not around you but within. You could feel them, a soft choir inside your bones, waiting, pressing, urging you toward the same unraveling. And yet you did not vanish. Not yet. The music demanded patience. The movement swelled, strings bowing with sinews that quivered like severed nerves. The sound was no longer music but heartbeat, breath, pulse, hunger. Each note shook the marrow in your bones. You were dissolving, not from the skin outward but from within, like a candle whose flame eats its center before it collapses into itself. You dared to glance again at the now empty seat beside you. Though it appeared hollow, you swore the cushion pressed downward with weight unseen. A dent deepened there, and the lantern light caught on a shimmer, a faint glisten as though sound itself had condensed into shape. And then, you heard it. A voice, faint, but distinct enough that your throat tightened. It was not random. It was not the murmur of strangers. It was a voice you recognized. The voice of someone you had lost long ago. Someone buried. Someone gone. The sound passed through you like cold water rushing into your lungs, filling every cavity of your being until you could not tell where the voice ended and you began. The empty seat beside you groaned, as though longing to collapse into your own, merging, forcing you closer to something you could not resist. And in that terrible, delicate moment you understood, the audience was not merely vanishing. They were joining. The orchestra was not merely playing, it was consuming. The music was a loom, and each unraveling shadow became a thread woven into its endless fabric. Those seats would never truly be empty again, because the essence they held was not gone. It was bound. And now, piece by piece, you were being bound with them. You closed your eyes, but the darkness there was not your own. It belonged to them, the dissolved, the surrendered. And when you opened them again, the stage seemed closer, as though the conductor's eyeless gaze had shifted toward you, seeing not your body but the part of you already gone, the slivers of identity pulled thread by thread into its symphony. You sat perfectly still, unable to move, unable to breathe without permission. The third movement was not finished yet. The audience was still dissolving around you. And when the final chord came, a low, bone-deep vibration that rattled the amphitheater like the groan of the mountain itself, you realized that you had not been spared. You had been saved, preserved a little longer, for reasons you could not yet understand. The seat beside you was still heavy. Still whispering. Still waiting. And the music had only just begun to demand. The music had been swelling for what felt like hours, every measure pressing harder against the walls of your mind. The air itself had thickened into something that scraped when you inhaled, a substance less like oxygen and more like the residue of burnt incense and dried blood. And then, without warning, without pause, the orchestra pushed forward into a crescendo so vast, so all-consuming, that the very mountain beneath you began to convulse. The stone under your feet buckled as if it were breathing. A deep groan thundered through the amphitheater, rolling from the carved steps into the hollow belly of the earth. The entire structure quivered with a seismic shudder, as though it were not an arena at all but the ribcage of some enormous creature, its brittle bones straining under the weight of the sound. Dust trickled down from unseen heights, catching in the pale light of the ghostly lanterns, and for a moment it looked as though snow was falling. But when the flakes landed on your arm, they seared the skin with a heat like acid. The orchestra's bow strokes tore at the silence with jagged edges. The violins shrieked, not music now but a violent, rending cry, each note piercing through the fabric of the night like a knife stabbing a curtain. The cellos moaned like the groaning of iron girders being torn apart, the vibration rattling your teeth until your jaw ached. The drums, those terrible drums of stretched flesh, beat in furious succession, faster and faster, until they mimicked the frenzied pulse of a heart in panic. And above all, through all, was the mountain itself, alive, in pain, convulsing in rhythm with the symphony. The sound seemed to sink deep into the stone, awakening something buried, something ancient. The ground split with hairline cracks that crawled outward from the stage, snaking like veins of darkness toward the outer edges of the amphitheater. Each crack released a thin wisp of vapor, pale and shimmering, carrying with it a smell that curdled the stomach, rotting marrow, stagnant water, and the unmistakable sweetness of decay. The sky overhead did not remain untouched. It rippled, flexing like a skin stretched too thin, as though the night itself was nothing more than a fragile film stretched over a gaping void. Then came the fractures. They did not begin as lightning, but as sudden, sharp cracks of sound, audible fissures tearing across the heavens. Jagged seams of brightness carved into the night, each one flickering with a violent brilliance before spreading wider. It was not light as you knew it, but something harder, sharper, impossible to look at directly. It was the illumination of sound made visible, the scream of the orchestra etched into the canvas of the sky. Every fracture in the firmament pulsed in time with the orchestra's notes, widening as the instruments bled their violence into the air. A violin shriek opened one crack into a yawning wound that oozed a sickly luminescence. A drum's thunder split another seam, spilling rivulets of black fire that dripped down like ink across the stars. The entire sky trembled, splintering into shards of silence and discord, and you felt the pressure in your ears build until warm blood trickled down the side of your neck. The audience of shadows around you began to convulse in their seats. Some clutched their heads, their veiled faces tilted upward toward the fractured heavens as if waiting for something to fall through. Others sat perfectly still, but their forms wavered, trembling as though they were being drawn upward by invisible strings. Their silhouettes flickered between substance and absence, between flesh and vapor, their outlines dissolving with each violent blast of sound. And the conductor, the conductor, towered above it all. The eyeless face, polished and reflective as bone, caught the rupturing light of the sky and gleamed with unholy brilliance. Its robes writhed like serpents in the absence of wind, the vertebrae staff twitching with new vigor, every segment of bone grinding together like teeth. With every sweep of its hand, the instruments howled in greater ferocity, and with each strike of the staff against the ground, the mountain groaned as though something within it strained to break free. The sound was no longer confined to your ears. It coursed through your veins, riding the current of your blood. Your heart no longer beat for itself, it was an echo of the drums, a prisoner of rhythm. Your lungs expanded only when the cellos dragged their bowstrings. Even your thoughts, the fragile sanctuary you had clung to throughout the ordeal, shattered like glass under the weight of the crescendo. There was no you. There was only music, and pain, and the mountain screaming through its broken bones. And then, in the violence of it all, you began to hear the voices. Not the whispers from the second movement, nor the dissolving moans of the audience, but something deeper, vaster, older. A roar that rose from the cracks in the earth, a cacophony of countless souls pressed together, howling in chorus. They did not beg for release now, they demanded. Their voices crashed against one another, an ocean of rage and lament, spilling upward to meet the fractured sky. Every nerve in your body felt flayed raw. Your vision blurred, your bones quaked in sympathy with the orchestra's instruments, and somewhere beneath the roar of violins and the cracking of stone, you thought you heard your own voice screaming. It was not a sound you willed, but a fragment of yourself torn loose, wrung out like cloth soaked in blood. The symphony was stripping you down to your essence, peeling away layer after layer until you were nothing but vibration. The crescendo climbed higher, impossibly higher, until the sound resembled light and the light resembled pain. The fractures in the sky widened into gaping abysses, and for one terrible instant you saw what lay beyond them, not stars, not heavens, but vast fields of skeletons woven together into endless, writhing shapes. They stirred, shifting in tides, a sea of bones stretching out into infinity. And somewhere among that vast expanse, a colossal shadow began to stir. The mountain shuddered once more, a quake so violent that entire slabs of stone cracked loose from the amphitheater walls, tumbling into the abyss below. The lanterns flickered madly, their pale flames stretching toward the sky as if yearning to escape. The audience shrieked, not as individuals but as one collective voice, echoing the cry of the mountain itself. The crescendo had reached its zenith. Notes no longer existed as distinct sounds, they overlapped into a singular violence, a tearing of existence itself. The mountain was breaking. The sky was breaking. And you, sitting among shadows with your veins pounding in borrowed rhythm, knew that you too were breaking. The final bow stroke pierced through the air like a blade of bone through flesh, and for a heartbeat, for a suspended, breathless moment, the world stood on the edge of obliteration. The music did not end. It simply tore open a silence so vast, so suffocating, that you feared it would devour the last scraps of who you were. And still, you knew, the symphony was not finished. The first fracture in the mountain came as a groan, long and low, as if stone itself had drawn in a rattling breath. You felt it beneath your feet before you heard it, a tremor that rippled up your legs and into your spine, a vibration that seemed less like the quaking of earth and more like a heartbeat too large for the body that held it. The orchestra did not pause. Their bows of bone and sinew continued scraping across strings fashioned from human hair, each note pressed into the trembling night like nails hammered into wood. The sound and the shaking fused until they were inseparable, and suddenly the amphitheater was no longer carved into the side of a mountain, it was inside something that lived, and it had just stirred. The cracked stones beneath your feet shifted with a grinding protest. Dust fell in fine curtains from the high arches and broken ledges of the amphitheater. It looked like snowfall, if snow could choke. The air swarmed with the taste of iron, bitter and raw, as though veins had burst open beneath the rock. With every note of the symphony, the stone fissured further. Lines of jagged black spread outward like lightning frozen in place, but these cracks were not hollow, they were veins, filled with something darker than shadow, something that pulsed faintly in time with the orchestra. And then came the first bone. It rose slowly from one of the deeper ruptures in the ground, as if pushed upward by unseen fingers from below. A femur, impossibly white against the earth, still wet with glistening sinew. It protruded like the pillar of a ruined temple, and even before the audience of shadows turned their veiled faces toward it, you knew what it was, not the ruin of some ancient beast, but a piece of what was being summoned. More followed. Vertebrae, enormous and uneven, grinding together as they emerged, clicking like the teeth of a vast and unseen jaw. They forced their way through stone as though it were nothing but brittle paper. A rib the size of a bridge arched into the air, dripping black ichor that sizzled when it touched the amphitheater floor. Each new piece that surfaced trembled as though it was still alive, twitching against its own resurrection. The orchestra did not falter. If anything, their music grew more fervent, a relentless hunger behind each note. The violins shrieked like flayed nerves, the drums of skin pounded like 1,000 heartbeats in unison, the flutes moaned with the voices of those long since silenced. And with each measure, the pieces of the figure rose higher, knitting themselves together with a grotesque elegance. Tendons formed from strands of mist and shadow wrapped themselves around bleached bones. Joints cracked into place. The spine stretched, vertebrae locking with audible finality. It was being assembled bone by bone, note by note, as if the orchestra's music was both command and glue, forcing death to wear itself like armor once more. You tilted your head back, your neck straining painfully, trying to take it all in. The figure climbed higher than the amphitheater, higher than the ridges of the mountain, until its ribcage alone blocked the stars. And yet it was not complete. The colossal shape continued to grow, unfurling from the earth with the inevitability of a nightmare flowering. Its skull rose last, slow and solemn, its hollow eye sockets yawning like two black suns. The lantern light glimmered against its ivory dome, making it look less like bone and more like polished marble, an idol, a god wrought not of faith but of corpses. Its sheer size defied understanding. The mountain seemed small in comparison, merely the ground it used as cradle. You realized then that this was no summoning in the sense of calling forth a spirit or monster, it was an exhumation. The mountain had been its tomb. The amphitheater had always been its ribcage, its chamber of resonance. And tonight, the music was not creating it but waking it, coaxing it into remembering what it once was. When it moved, the earth screamed. Its first gesture was slight, almost tentative, one titanic hand, skeletal and cracked, flexed against the horizon. Each finger was the length of a cathedral spire, each joint grinding with the sound of avalanches collapsing. Yet the orchestra did not waver. Their music only grew louder, aligning perfectly with its movement. The bow strokes matched the creaking of its bones, the drums rolled in time with the rumble of shifting mountains, and the flute sighed as the wind of its breath stirred through the valleys. It was playing along, not with instruments, but with its body, an accompaniment of scale so vast it made the musician seem like insects tuning strings. You clutched the edge of your seat though you no longer remembered why. The seat was cold stone, carved and worn smooth, but you could swear it pulsed faintly beneath your grip, as if in sympathy with the music. Around you, the audience of shadows tilted their heads upward as one, their veiled faces locked on the Colossus. Their silence was unbearable now, heavier than any scream. You could sense their awe, their worship, their surrender, though none of them moved. The figure's presence pressed against your mind in a way words could not hold. It was geological, like cliffs collapsing or oceans shifting, forces too large to reckon with, too inevitable to resist. Its skull tilted, and for a moment you felt its hollow sockets rest upon you, upon each member of the audience, upon every stone and drop of air. That empty gaze was not absence, it was possession. To be seen by nothing was to be unmade. And then it joined the performance in truth. Its spine bowed with the motion of a conductor, echoing the eyeless figure below who still guided the orchestra with its staff of vertebrae. The colossal form's arms rose, not graceful but ruinous, the scraping of their movement peeling clouds from the sky. With its first downward motion, the orchestra crashed into a fury of notes so violent it rattled the bones in your body. The Colossus's hand struck the earth a mile beyond the amphitheater, and the ground convulsed as if struck by thunder. Trees splintered. Rivers leapt from their beds. The mountain itself groaned in agony. And yet, it was all in perfect rhythm. The sky fractured. Not with lightning, but with sound, visible sound, cracks of luminous vibration that spidered across the firmament. Through them you glimpsed nothingness, a depthless expanse where no stars burned, only silence waiting to swallow. The cracks widened with each gesture, each crash of bone against earth, each scream drawn from the instruments of flesh and sinew. You could not cover your ears. Your hands refused to move, pinned as though nailed to your lap by unseen force. Yet what horrified you most was not the immensity of the figure, nor the destruction it heralded, but the way its music intertwined with your own body. You felt it coursing through you as if your veins were strings, your bones were reeds, your skin a stretched drum. You were being played, note by note, a single instrument in a symphony too vast for comprehension. And deep inside, beneath the horror, another realization bloomed: the music was not unfamiliar. These cadences, these rhythms, they were echoes of your own pulse, of your own hidden terrors and forgotten memories. It was drawing from you, as it had from the shadows beside you, as it had from the very mountain that had been forced into womb and coffin alike. You were part of its orchestra whether you had chosen to be or not. The Colossus's movements grew more fluid as the final bones clicked into place, its form no longer fractured but whole, a vast cathedral of death-given motion. It towered against the broken sky, its ribs framing the fractured heavens like stained glass of ivory and shadow. When it inhaled, valleys bent inward; when it exhaled, the stars trembled. And still, the symphony played. There comes a moment in every performance when sound folds inward, when the orchestra's violence collides with itself and crashes into nothing. The silence is not planned, not part of the written score, it is the abyss between one breath and the next. When the conductor raises its vertebrae staff and the instruments fall still, the amphitheater becomes a wound without bleeding. It is this wound you fall into, unresisting. At first, the absence is deafening, a ringing so sharp it feels like glass grinding inside your ears. Your skull is a bell struck without hands. But slowly, unbearably slowly, even that phantom echo is stripped away. The mountain's groans, the scraping of the stone seats, the whispers that had crowded every corner of your perception, they vanish one by one, as though each has been methodically erased with a chalk-dusted cloth. What remains is absence, but absence made heavy, dense, suffocating. The silence here is not the silence of sleep, or the pause before breath. It is silence as a predator, a weight pressing in on you from all sides, silencing not only sound but thought itself. You try to remember how the last note sounded, but memory has already thinned. The bow of ribs, the groan of bone cello, the skin drum's shuddering pulse, they are dissolving, already less vivid than they should be. Even the colossal skeletal figure that had risen from the mountain feels like a dream you've already begun to forget. Was it there at all? Or was it something your mind painted in panic, a hallucination conjured to fill the unbearable gaps between noise? The question does not linger. It drifts away like smoke you forgot how to grasp. Something more horrifying occurs, your thoughts do not pause, they dissolve. Not stopped, not quieted, erased. One by one, memories are plucked from you like strings cut from a harp. You think of your name, and it unravels before it even finishes forming in your head. You reach for your mother's voice, the laughter of a friend, the scrape of childhood knees against pavement, and find only fog. Each recollection evaporates in silence, until you are not remembering less, but remembering nothing. Even your awareness of time decays. You could have been sitting in this silence for a breath or for centuries. The distinction collapses. The amphitheater could be a prison older than mountains or something birthed only this evening from nightmare. Both are true, both meaningless. The absence of sound makes you untethered, a ghost with no anchor. The shadows of the audience remain seated around you, but you can no longer hear them breathe, shuffle, or whisper. Even their silhouettes seem drained of reality, their outlines thinner, as if silence itself is hollowing them out. Perhaps they were never people at all. Perhaps they were only echoes, waiting for this pause to erase them entirely. You try to speak, but the silence swallows your attempt before it escapes your lips. You feel your jaw move, your tongue shape syllables, but no sound comes. Not even the faintest vibration. It is as though your body has forgotten the concept of voice. Panic wells up, but even panic, too, is muted here. Fear is a kind of noise, and silence does not allow it. You are hollow, stripped, reduced to the outline of a self. There is hypnosis in it, a lull deeper than any drug. Your limbs grow heavy as stone, your chest rises and falls only because silence wills it so. You feel like a puppet whose strings are cut, dangling in nothing, unable to fall because gravity itself has been hushed into absence. And then, worse than the emptiness, you realize silence has taken something far more intimate than sound, it has taken language. Not merely your ability to speak, but your ability to think in words. Your inner monologue has been gagged, stitched closed by the void. You attempt to think I am here, but the sentence will not form. Thought now comes only as impressions, as raw pulses of sensation that vanish before you can bind them in words. The world around you shifts, subtly, impossibly. Without language to stabilize it, reality itself grows fluid. The cracked amphitheater stones shimmer, sometimes solid, sometimes translucent as smoke. The ghostly lanterns wink in and out, replaced by stars, then by nothing at all. The colossal figure of bones beyond the stage flickers like a mirage, its outline replaced by the curve of the mountain, then by void. The silence is not absence, it is replacement. It does not merely remove, it reshapes. Your body, too, begins to feel unreal. Your arms, once heavy, now seem distant, belonging to someone else. Your breath does not belong to you. Your heartbeat is faint, as though stolen, a pulse buried in silence's chest instead of your own. You are not dying, death would be a kind of event, a rupture, and silence permits no rupture. You are dissolving into a stillness beyond life, beyond death, beyond all definition. And yet, something stirs within that absence. A rhythm, faint, almost imperceptible, hums at the edges of silence. It is not sound exactly, more like the ghost of sound. The suggestion of a note that never arrives. It coils around you like mist, brushing the edges of your hollowed form. The silence has stripped you bare so that this ghost note might enter you without resistance. And you realize, the silence is not empty. It is preparation. Every pause in music exists for the sake of what follows. Every silence is the lung inhaling before the scream. What terrifies you most is not the silence itself, but the certainty that when it ends, it will demand something from you. Something you may not have left to give. You feel it then, the presence of the conductor. Not in sight, not in sound, but inside the silence itself. Its eyeless face hovers at the edges of your perception, vast and intimate at once. The vertebrae staff trembles in anticipation. Its stillness is worse than its movement. You know that when its arm falls, silence will crack like brittle glass, and the world will not be the same. For now, you float in the pause. Thoughtless, voiceless, nameless. You are neither audience nor performer, neither alive nor gone. You are the space between notes, waiting to be filled. And you understand, dimly, terribly, the silence is practicing on you. It is shaping you into its instrument. The conductor's eyeless face tilts upward, robes fluttering in a motionless air. The vertebrae staff twitches as if alive, a nervous tremor running from its base to its jagged tip. Then, in one smooth, deliberate gesture, it sweeps its hand through the air. The orchestra responds, not instantly, not obediently, but hungrily, as though each instrument had been waiting, aching, to sink itself into flesh again. The first sound is not a note. It is the tearing of paper, the splitting of fabric, the quiet but undeniable sound of something delicate being ripped apart. It takes you a moment to realize it is not outside you but within. A seam inside your chest begins to open. The music no longer hovers in the air, it gnaws. It claws. It moves inward. You place your hands against your ribs, as though bracing against a force trying to crawl out of you, but the sensation isn't of something leaving. It is of something entering. A bow slides across string somewhere in the pit, and you feel your breath stagger as if your lungs had been strummed. A deep thrum from the cello vibrates, and your very spine shivers, vertebra by vertebra, until it feels like your own backbone is an instrument, strung up and tuned for their symphony. Then comes the unraveling. Your name, something so simple, so constant that you have never thought of it as fragile, begins to fray. At first, it's a faint buzzing in the back of your mind, the way you might forget a word on the tip of your tongue. But the more you try to think of it, the further it slips. You mouth it silently, trying to catch it like a moth between your palms, but the sound has already begun to thin, to scatter. You can still remember its shape, its weight in your mouth, but the syllables disintegrate like smoke before you can grip them. The violins swell in jagged tremors, bows cutting the air with frantic, restless energy. Each note seems to shear away a piece of memory. The streets of your childhood, the warmth of your first fire, the face of someone who once loved you, gone in quick, painless slices, carved from you as if they were never yours at all. The orchestra does not ask permission. It takes. Your reflection fades next. Not physically at first, but in your mind's eye. You reach for the memory of what you look like, and find only fragments. A vague outline, a blur where eyes should be, a jawline smudged into nothing. The more you chase it, the more it flees. When you lift your trembling hands to your face, the skin feels both familiar and alien, as though belonging to someone else. A double bass groans, its strings buzzing with a low dirge, and suddenly your fingertips seem porous, draining away their heat, their meaning. The audience of shadows is no longer still. They are shifting, not with sound, but with hunger. You can feel them leaning toward you, not physically, but spiritually, like dozens of unseen mouths parted in anticipation. You look to the empty chair beside you, once harmless, now impossibly heavy. Something sits there. Not a shape you can see, but a density, a pressure, as if reality itself is bending around a presence. You know, instinctively, it has your name now. It holds it like a ticket, proof that you are no longer entirely yours. The conductor lifts its staff again, and the room obeys with a thunderclap of sound. The timpani roar like earthquakes, each strike rattling through your chest as though your heart is being forced to keep pace. The flutes whistle, but not sweetly, they shriek like wind forced through the cracks of a coffin lid. The strings gnash and scrape, dragging sound into shapes too jagged to be music, too precise to be chaos. You resist, your body tensing, your mind clinging desperately to what little remains. A fragment of memory here, a flicker of identity there. You clutch yourself tightly, as if holding the pieces in place will keep you whole. But the orchestra notices. The music leans harder, louder, crueler. Resistance is no shield, it is invitation. The hungrier you fight, the sharper the music's teeth become. A voice, thin, whispering, threads itself into the symphony. It is not sung but spoken, each syllable a vibration in your bones. Let go, it says. You are only making it worse. You recognize the voice. It is your own. The shadows in the seats around you dissolve further. What had been outlines of figures now unravel into ribbons of smoke and strands of sound, unraveling like silk scarves pulled endlessly from a hidden pocket. Each dissolves into the music, and the music swells fatter, more radiant, as if nourished. You realize, with a sickening clarity, that they are not watching the orchestra. They are the orchestra. Each vanished shadow has been absorbed, their essence twisted into strings, brass, bone, and hide. And you, still solid, still present, are next. Your hands betray you first. They twitch, then spasm, as if strings were tied to each finger. You look down in horror as your skin seems to ripple, veins glowing faintly with a rhythm that does not belong to you. The violinists saw their bows across rib-bone strings, and with each drag, your muscles convulse. You are being tuned, adjusted, refined. The conductor's faceless gaze turns directly to you, though it has no eyes to see. The vertebrae staff quivers, and you feel your heartbeat locked to its tempo. The longer it conducts, the less your pulse feels like your own. You are no longer certain where your body ends and the orchestra begins. A note rises, sharp, piercing, and with it, a piece of your soul lifts, torn loose as easily as hair from a comb. You cry out, but the sound is weak, pitiful, drowned beneath the music's tidal force. That fragment of you twists upward into the air, catches on a bow, a drum skin, a string. And then it plays. You hear yourself in the orchestra, screaming as harmony, wailing as melody. It is grotesque. It is exquisite. The music claws deeper, not satisfied with fragments. It pulls at your reflection in the eyes of others, shredding how the world remembers you. If someone spoke your name now, they would hesitate. If someone thought of your face, it would blur, half forgotten. You are being erased not from the world, but from memory. And the more the world forgets you, the more the orchestra remembers you. The conductor lowers its staff slowly, and the instruments tighten into a final, dreadful unity. This is no longer performance. It is consumption. You feel your thoughts thinning into single notes, your voice becoming vibration, your heartbeat nothing but percussion. Every attempt to resist only tears you faster, like cloth stretched against too many hooks. Your identity is a feast, and you are being devoured course by course. And in the terrible clarity of the music, you understand, this is not the orchestra's cruelty. It is its purpose. Every figure in the audience once sat where you sit now. Every shadow that dissolved had a name once, a reflection once, a story once. Now they are music. Now they are forever. And soon, so will you. There comes a moment when struggle becomes pointless, when resistance only magnifies the ache of loss. You feel yourself hollowing, the echo of your own name stretched thin until it becomes nothing more than a whisper devoured by the air. The orchestra, relentless and patient, has been dismantling you one string at a time, until you are no longer certain what fragments remain. And then, like a candle guttering out in a room where no one will relight it, you let go. The moment you surrender, the agony vanishes. The tearing stops. The scraping claws of the music soften into a gentle vibration that hums in your bones, cradling rather than consuming. Your body feels impossibly light, as though it has shared weight and history alike. The seat beneath you grows colder, yet it no longer matters. You are being woven into something larger, something older than time itself. Around you, the amphitheater shifts. The shadows seated in their silent rows lean closer, as if acknowledging your acceptance. Their outlines flicker like smoke caught in lantern light, and for the first time, you see them not as faceless watchers but as echoes of those who came before. Their edges blur with the same stillness that now creeps into your own form. You are joining them, not as flesh and bone, not even as memory, but as resonance, as tone. The music does not end, it never ends. It circles and coils, feeding itself, folding time so the beginning and end are indistinguishable. You feel yourself melt into the second violin's quiver, into the sigh of the cello's hollow ribs, into the faint vibration of the cracked stones beneath every seat. You are no longer separate. You are sound, shadow, and silence, part of a chorus that will play for centuries more. A strange peace washes over you. The loneliness you carried up the mountain, the unspoken fear of insignificance, the desperate wish to matter, it dissolves here. You matter now, though not in the way you once hoped. You are another figure in the audience of shadows, a witness and a participant in the endless symphony. The comfort is haunting, unsettling in its inevitability, but it is comfort all the same. You are no longer alone. The conductor lowers its vertebrae staff, robes fluttering without wind. The colossal figure looming beyond the cracked sky bows its jagged head, as if acknowledging your arrival. The silence between notes stretches again, but it no longer terrifies you. Instead, it cradles you in its vastness, promising eternity in its pause. You take your place in the eternal audience. You wait. You listen. And when the next soul wanders up the mountain path, drawn by the same whisper that lured you here, you will be waiting in silence, ready to welcome them into the fold. The cycle will turn again. The music will rise again. And you, now indistinguishable from the rest, will be part of the shadows they fear, and perhaps, in the end, the comfort they crave. You are not forgotten. You are not separate. You are not alone. You are the music. You are the audience. You are eternal.